One thing I would like to address is the issue of so-called computer fraud versus election fraud done in the voting stations by the election staff. Now, from the time I posted the video on March 28th last year, I started noticing a lot of E+F G 1450 were going on there saying, oh, I don't think that this video is like true. I think that it was definitely computer fraud. Like this is from the DPP. Like the computer fraud is the direction to go in. Now, once I saw a lot of those kinds of comments, I knew that the E+F G are, a portion of them are trying to direct things towards computer fraud because they don't want us looking at the election staff and the 鹰眼部队. The 鹰眼部队 are the E+F G basically. So they wanted to direct things towards a so-called computer system that rigged the election. However, that never made much sense to me because if you look at the raw numbers, the way that the ballots came out, there is no indication that the election was rigged by computer. You can just tell from the statistical analysis, this has been done by hand.
可是在今年新北市的选举，韩国瑜的支持度跟蔡英文的支持度竟然呈现了正相关。有人会说，这个不合理啊。其实不合理是太客气的用语，这个是不可能存在。除非你有做票，你有用人工去干预他的这个选票，特意的把它做出来这样的一个形状，否则是万不可能发生的。
It was based on human perception. It's like, okay, we're going to steal Hanguri's ballots in New Taipei City, but we're not going to steal his ballots in Taoyuan. Like, what computer system would do things like that? A computer system would uniformly steal the ballots from the candidate that they were trying to cheat. So why would the staff steal in New Taipei City and not Taoyuan? Well, it's because of what happened in the last election in 2018. The KMT did poorly in Taoyuan because there's a strong DPP city mayor there. So they just figure, well, we don't need to steal here. But in New Taipei City, where Kuo-Yu was elected, the KMT had a lot of support. So they were like going, okay, so we steal here and we don't need to steal here. However, they underestimated Hanguri's support in DPP-controlled areas. So they didn't steal enough there. So what happened is that you just saw a jump in support rate in DPP-controlled areas because they thought they just mostly had to stuff ballots for Tsai Ing-wen and they didn't have to steal as much because the KMT didn't do as well last time. So this is how obvious it is that they did not use a computer system to rig the election. Also, you can't use a computer system to rig an election in Taiwan. The system is designed so that the final results have to come from the voting station and from the voting station only. Once the voting station determines the final results, they write it on that table. They post the table so that anyone from the general public can take a picture of it, and then they have evidence of what happened in that voting station. And that final piece of evidence is what gets sent to the Central Election Commission. Now, whatever happens on TV and the Central Election computer readout doesn't matter at all. The final results are based on that table, that piece of paper.
主任监察员，我已经在投开票报告表上填好每位候选人得票数及无效票数了，麻烦你再核对一次。
好的，我看看，票数没有任何问题。
谢谢你。现在向各位参观者宣布开票结果。要注意，填写投开票报告表时，千万不要记错或倒置票数。经由主任监察员核对无误后，才由主任管理员、主任监察员签章。麻烦你将这份投开票报告表贴在开票所门口。好的。请你将这份投开票报告表尽快送到选务作业中心，让工作人员能尽快将票数输入电脑。
好的。
However, they're spitting out the ballots on TV or by the central election computer system are completely unimportant. So whatever it is that Dongsen did, ETTV, with that, jumping to 10 million ballots or whatever, that was never important in the first place. That's why I've never addressed it on my channel. It's something that did happen, and all it means is that ETTV or Dongsen had some kind of prior knowledge to what the results would be. It means that Dongsen has been given something to show us, like these are the ballots. And upon closer inspection, for example, in Kaohsiung, you can see certain areas where Hungary's support rate increased dramatically, and then they would go back down. That's because there are voting stations that are not under the Central Election Commission's control. So those voting stations saw huge increases of Hungary's support from 2018 to 2020. Now, if you're a computer system, wouldn't you make it more uniform? You would make it so that his support just decreased throughout Kaohsiung because he's a bad candidate. So, they were setting up the Han recall on June 6th. Why would you allow certain voting stations, certain areas of Kaohsiung to see a skyrocket of support for Hangul? Why give away something like that and report it as the final result? It's because the Central Election Commission cannot change those results. The general public has access to the final results in the voting station. Therefore, anyone taking a picture of those final results can look up the final results on the Excel spreadsheet on the Central Election Commission website and check to see if they changed the results or not. Okay? All of the results, as far as we know, match from the voting station to the Excel spreadsheet. So there's actually no room for the computer system to change those results, because if they get caught in even one place in Taiwan, then it raises questions as far as the validity of the election. So that's why the results look so weird, with Hungary's support rate going up and down like that. It's because as much control as the Central Election Commission had in this election over the election staff, they didn't have full control. And those places where they didn't have full control, that's where we saw the truth. That's where we saw that Hangul actually won this election by a lot. So there's never been any indication that a computer system rigged the election or that they changed the results from the voting station to their final results. Like in between there, like nothing happened.
I should clarify that after the election, Dr. Ma and I gathered up all the ballot report tables and whatever other photographic evidence we could find from the voting stations that indicated the actual ballot returns, and they always matched with the official Central Election Commission results in the Excel spreadsheet. Granted, we did not have that many, but it was a random sample, and they all matched. That's why I've always known that this election was not rigged by computer. And since then, not a single voting station in Taiwan has been proven to be different from the Central Election Commission's final results in the Excel spreadsheet.
新北市这个区段呢，它基本上都是低于1的。高雄市那就更低了，高雄市是偷票偷的最厉害的地方。可是到桃园市那就不一样了，桃园市这个韩国瑜得票数比上一次的这个候选人又增加了很多。
What did Dr. Ma's analysis really show us? Number one, it showed us conclusively that the election was rigged. Number two, it also showed that the election was rigged by hand. The DPP, the Tsai administration, they think on multiple levels. You can't just think of them as a group of people that don't want you to know that they cheated. Their first option is to try to get you to believe the election wasn't rigged.
我来讲做票。讲做票，我先把结论讲给大家听哈，就是做票啦，260万全做出来的啦。但是我跟你讲，如果要大规模做到260万票，它需要2个要件，2个要件同时存在，才有可能做到260万票。第一个要件就是中选会必须是民进党掌握的，
而这一次，蔡英文直接就让有伪造文书、经验丰富的李进勇从中选会来动手脚。
是啊，对，第一个要件达到了，可是很少人去看第二个要件，大家都看第一个要件。 你知道台湾的选举的投开监票的执行是谁在执行的？是地方执行，是地方的选委会在执行。
李进勇利用中选会的职权控制各地选务，由中选会直接派人进驻各乡镇市公所，大量任用他们训练过的特定人士混为选务人员，更在投票箱与投票工具上动手脚。
你知道国民党2018赢几席的县市长吗？15席，有15个地方的选委会的选监投开的执行事项，甚至选务人员的选任是谁决定的？是国民党决定的。
So we can see here that KMT City Councilor Luo Zicheng was sent to the United States to spread disinformation that because the KMT had control of 15 of the cities and counties in Taiwan, that the Tsai administration could not have committed widespread election fraud. However, we know that this isn't true. We know that the Central Election Commission appointed people directly to the district offices in cities and counties in Taiwan, regardless of who the city mayor was. So even though Han Kuo-Yu was the Kaohsiung city mayor, the election staff in Kaohsiung and the rest of the cities and counties controlled by the KMT were controlled directly by the central government. They were under direct control of Li Jingyong.
2020总统选举已经确定蔡英文是作票当选，但是许多人在争议是现场作票还是电脑作票呢？电脑作票太过简单容易，一旦在野党强硬起来要追查电脑资料，就一翻两瞪眼，再无可赖的空间。然而有没有电脑作票这一个环节的设计呢？作票一定要有选票支持，这样被作掉的一方查验起来就无争议。就像选台北市长的丁守中被作掉，验票也验不出来，因为在拖延开票的时间内，票已经灌好。
If you insist on believing that the election was rigged, then they want you to think that the election was rigged via computer. Because they don't want you looking at the election staff and the 鹰眼部队, the 1450, the 1.11. A regular 1.11 will go on the comments and say, oh no, there's nothing wrong in this election, there's people watching from both sides or whatever. And then a more sophisticated 1.11 will say, God, you know, I don't think it's too difficult to rig the election with so many election staff. Like, how could this many people be organized to do something so complex like this? Okay, it must be done by computer by just a few people. Well, sorry, the election cannot be rigged by computer, as I've just explained. So it is in fact done by the election staff, and they were inconsistent about it, and that's why the results turned out the way they did. So when you look at the DPP, the 1.11, you have to understand that they have different layers of strategy. They have their primary strategy and they have their secondary strategy. So this computer fraud theory is basically their secondary strategy. What they're showing you on TV has nothing to do with what the final results are. They can show you anything they want, but the voting stations have to report real results with actual physical ballots inside envelopes at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter what they show you. The TV stations have never, from day one, ever reported real results on television. They just report whatever they want. They try to increase their ballot count artificially in order to get you to switch to their channel. Okay? It was never real to begin with. Since I've been around the media since 2004, I've known this, that the ballot returns on TV are not real. They only become real at the end when they have to check with the Central Election Commission, and the Central Election Commission results only become real when they are verified with the voting stations. So all the cheating, if there is cheating, has to be done inside the voting stations. So you could say that for the first 6 months or so after the election, I didn't really pay much attention to the whole computer fraud and Dongwei Telgo's videos. It just was unimportant to me. However, after the Central Election Commission got uneasy with Peng Wen-zen saying on B-1 that he didn't believe the election results.
那817万那是真的啦哈，我从头到尾我都怀疑啦。
我嘛不相信呢。
我讲实在，因为我边啊足多朋友，热到要，你知道要翻额的人，因拢无去投票，我无骗你。 那海外的也是，都没人要回来，我哪的朋友都欢欣鼓舞的回来。
我再问你一个问题，你觉得817万票是真的吗？你自己觉得？
你可以，我摸着良心、search my soul。
对，
我怀疑耶。
我摸着我的脚踝，我都说我怀疑啊。
Then the issue of computer fraud suddenly got inserted into the news again. It's like this dormant issue that comes up whenever the topic of election fraud is brought up again. Suddenly, it's computer fraud all over again. And this is meant to distract the public away from the truth. The Tsai administration appears to have used 3 types of disinformation before and after the election to make their election fraud look plausible. The first was the anti-extradition Hong Kong protests that they claimed swayed public opinion their direction. The second was that young people came out in droves to support Tsai Ing-wen. The final piece of disinformation was the computer fraud theory. And this disinformation is not for the rest of the world to believe. It's an Easter egg made specifically for Hanguri supporters that believe the election was rigged. It's their way of distracting people who believe the election was rigged into thinking it was done by computer. This is their way of containing the problem. This is their way of distracting you from the election staff and the 鹰眼部队。
有冲突，我们看到现在的数字，蔡英文都在5%-8%跟6%之间，而我们看到韩国瑜这个会有什么样的影响吗？我们休息一下回来。好，我们现在看到这个数字，现在这个数字还在变化中，所以小平。
What is the Central Election Commission's endgame with this whole computer fraud theory? I believe that they want somebody to sue them for computer fraud. Now, they would actually invite that. If someone is actually foolish enough to sue the Central Election Commission for computer fraud, they can actually prove that they didn't use a computer system to rig the election. How can they prove that? They have all of those tables, those pieces of paper with the final results handwritten in hand, okay, assuming they haven't been destroyed. If someone sues them in court, they can actually take out all of them, all 17,000, and prove that they match the final results. And then the person suing the Central Election Commission would lose the case. Barely. So what I'm saying is, the Central Election Commission can prove that they didn't use a computer system to rig the election. Like, case closed. So that's why they want us to go down that path, so that they can win in court and say, well, I guess we didn't rig the election. Of course they did rig the election, they just didn't do it by computer. Let's give ourselves some background. Has any election in Taiwan ever been rigged by a computer system? Starting in 2000, when Li Denghui's people, the DPP, rigged their first election against James Song, Zong Zui, did they cheat by computer? They didn't. They cheated by hand, okay, stuffing ballots, stealing James Song's ballots. In 2004, they also cheated by hand. They used various methods in that election, stuffing, stealing, making Lian Song's ballots invalid on purpose, which is why there were so many invalid ballots in that election, and they were all concentrated in certain areas. 2006 Kaohsiung, okay, I don't know much about that election, but that election was very suspicious. The first time Chen Ju was elected in Kaohsiung is also believed to be rigged. In the 2018 Taipei City election, we saw what appeared to be changing of the results inside the Central Election Commission office, which is why they stayed up till like 2:30 in the morning. That was kind of a unique situation. I haven't seen that before. But nevertheless, it was still done by hand, except it was done in their office later on. And that was highly suspicious, and they certainly didn't want to repeat that for the 2020 presidential election. So Li Jingyong was brought in from Yunling, and he changed the whole system. He's like, we're going to go with cardboard boxes so we can properly steal the ballots from the bottom of the box. We can also store ballots underneath the secret compartment, you know, that hatch they have there. Tsai Ing-wen was really re-elected on the support of a cardboard box on January 11th, 2020. Like, without the secret compartment, she can't get an additional 4.3 million ballots, which I estimated by statistics, which is how much they stuffed. And they also couldn't have stolen that many ballots from Hangary without us seeing it, without a hole at the bottom of the box. Of course, there's some video that exists where they were just stealing the ballots right out of the box, and that was filmed. But in general, they use the bottom of the box. So my point is that no election in Taiwan has ever been rigged by a computer system. And a computer system cannot rig the election, okay? Because they can't predict what's going to happen in these voting stations. It's an uncertain situation, okay? They can't predict how the people are going to vote. It's very difficult to stuff and steal ballots so that they meet a certain number. There's another theory being pushed forth recently, okay, which is that they did rig it by computer, and then what happened in the voting stations was made to match what the computer system was saying. And I'm saying that that's also laughable, okay, because the computer system can't predict what's going to happen. The voting stations were given quotas. That means they were like given a predetermined number that they needed. For example, say 600 ballots for Tsai Ing-wen. So what would happen is that on the day of the election, they might get only 500 ballots for Tsai Ing-wen. So in the voting station that I was in, voting station 1292, okay, what they did was they got to the end, they didn't have enough. So they added more ballots. They came from outside of the box. I don't know where they came from, but suddenly I looked over there and there's like a stack of ballots next to the box. And then those ballots were completely fresh ballots, got added into the count. This is after they spent like 10 minutes counting the ballots. I've never seen that before, but that happened on January 11th, where additional ballots were added into the count afterwards. And this is all because these voting stations didn't meet their quotas, okay? So each voting station is given a quota by the Central Election Commission in their area. Say, this is what we want. We want this many ballots for Tsai Ing-wen, and we want no more than this many ballots for Han Kuo-Yu, okay, in order to let her win by 2.5 to 3 million ballots. So they do their best to reach that total, but it's very difficult for them to reach an exact total because their number one concern is that they don't want to get caught cheating, okay? No matter how carefully they plan this, they don't know what's going to happen in those voting stations. Or is the staff going to get cold feet and not be able to achieve what they've set out to achieve? Are they going to not be able to steal the ballots all of a sudden? Like they don't know what's going to happen, okay? So the stations do the best they can in order to reach their quota, and then they report it, okay? That's all that happened. And the election staff did their job. The election staff and the Ing that stayed up all night stuffing the cardboard boxes did their job, and they were able to achieve the results they wanted. So this whole way of thinking that the computer system set the results in a certain way and then the election staff have to meet those results, that's completely silly, okay? It's very difficult to do that, and there's no need to do that. And why would the computer system allow Hungary to win big in certain places? And how would they be able to predict something like that? Okay, the computer system doesn't know which voting stations are going to fail to cheat. So they don't know where that's going to happen exactly. Okay, so basically there was no computer fraud on January 11th. It was just something that they have used to misdirect us. We should be focused on the election staff. We should be focused on the Ing-wen, okay, because that's their weak point. That's the place that the Tsai administration can get exposed. Because these are people, they've been paid, and they don't want to get caught. They don't want to go to jail. So if these people start getting questioned, then something might happen, okay? If a string of these people come out and say like, yeah, we cheated, we don't want to go to jail, we were paid this much money to do this and that, then it's going to be a huge problem, okay? And that's what they're afraid of. So that's why they're pushing the computer fraud theory like crazy. Whenever the topic of election fraud comes up, we see practically inserted news saying, oh no, this is done by computer. And that's for the 15 to 20% of the Taiwan public that believes the election was rigged. They want you believing that it's a combination of computer fraud and maybe fraud that happened inside the voting stations, or it was completely done by computer. They just want you to focus mostly on the computer system.